I feel thanks. I feel like people normally stand with this, but it feels kind of awkward as well if I sit. Is it like in my discipline, like there's usually lots of notes and they kind of like read through their stuff. So and it involves sitting often with that. So if you guys don't mind, I'll just do that if that's okay. So yeah, my name is Jason. I am with the Department of Communication Arts, and thank you so much to Maria and Pete for inviting me to come here. I don't know if I look familiar to anybody, but I do show up to these things every so often, and so it's a really awesome opportunity to get athletics and academics together. So I've learned a lot, and I'm excited to chat with you all. So I am in the Department of Communication Arts. I am in the Media and Cultural Studies area of my department, which means my entry to sports is through sports media. When you can see my recent book that I just published on the topic. So my focus maybe is a little bit different than some of you in this room. So I thought for today, I would kind of give you a sense for kind of what my research program looks like, what the book's argument is a little bit here, and then maybe towards the end of this talk, like maybe try to find some inroads and some connections for our conversation going forward. So that's the plan, and we'll see if we can do this. So my book that came out, what was it, just in the last spring or something like that? It's about a year old now. It's about defining, as you can see, sports media. So the book's topic is simply what is sports media, what are sports media is the entry point. So I thought, since some of you might not be familiar with the discipline or something like that, we'll just start off with like, why would you ask a question like that, especially one that might seem so obvious? So we'll kind of talk through like why ask this question. So first off, one of the main drives of asking this question is because of the diversity of what can count as sports media. So first off, we can just start with the idea that sports themselves can be incredibly diverse. What sports can feel like and what it's like to be engaged with sports or watch sports can feel and look very different. The ways that popular mediated entertainment sports can be organized can also be extremely different. And finally, sports media companies are extremely heterogeneous, and they're getting more so as like online companies are trying to reach niche audiences. So we're getting like very, very particular ways of covering sports as well. And all this diversity, sports researchers can study very different things. Obviously, when we think about sports media, the first thing that might come to our mind are sports broadcasts that look like this, and for good reason. We will talk about these today. But sports media can be so many other things that aren't just this. Researchers who study sports can look at documentaries, websites, social media, and podcasts. And I know that, by the way, I have like all digital things up here, but obviously sports documentaries can be, presented in all sorts of different modes. Sports audio can be more than podcasts. We still have terrestrial radio and things like that. So it's not just digital, right? It's different mediums as well that sports media can be communicated to. And the other thing I'd like to note is, since we're talking diversity, these can be created by all sorts of different entities too. Leagues can make these, teams can make these, sports media companies can make these, fans can make these. So it's who's creating these things can also be extremely different. We can also, and we'll talk today about all the sponsorships and partnerships that fill the contemporary sports media landscape and all the ways those sponsorships can be reflected. Sports media can include gaming, including here FIFA, a sports video game, and sports betting, which are two very different kinds of games as well. And then finally, we should also talk about fandom as well. If we're going to think about fans, we should talk about fan cultures. How do they come together? How do they express themselves? What do they create? And we can ask the same about dissent, fan dissent. What happens when they come together to say that we don't like something or express something politically? So with all of this heterogeneity, the book's main question is, again, what are sports media? Are they just a loosely connected set of research topics, or is there something that brings all of this very diverse stuff together? So that's the question. What's unifying all this really odd, different stuff? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, great. So in my book, in my field, there's this very kind of like popular, important book called Genre and Television. In this work, Jason Mattel, he argues that, among other things, that televisual genres are formed by industries, texts, and audiences. Don't worry about what that means right now. We'll get to that in a second. But more important for my purposes, and what caught my eye about this book, is he mentions that maybe sports is a televised genre. Meaning that if you look on television and you could say, oh, that's a sports show, and it's not, say, a soap opera, a game show, a cop show, or something like that, right? It is a genre that's of itself that has its own conventions that can be studied. But so I really liked that. However, you know from what I just said that I think that sports are so much more than just what's on television. And so I kind of took his idea that genre is comprised of these things, but noted that it's transmedia, the idea that this is a genre that's communicated, yes, across television, but also in podcasts and documentaries and things of the sort. So it's across genres. I do, though, however, agree with Mattel that genre is formed through industries, texts, and audiences. So what does that mean? And so here we get a quick lesson on genre, which I'm sure none of you thought you guys were going to be getting when you came in today. So what does it mean to study genre in the way that Mattel does, in the way that we might? Well, genres set associations and conventions that are used to say this is part of one genre and maybe not part of another. So before we get into how that might work for sports, because I think that might be kind of a weird way to think about sports, let's take a genre that we might be more familiar with. We are in a superhero moment. So let's talk about superhero stories. What makes a superhero story a superhero story? Thinking about the genre again. Well, you might take a movie. Well, based on this movie, you might think something like, well, it has to do with a superpowered hero. But then you might think for a second and say, wait a minute, there's heroes, superheroes even, that don't have superpowers. So superpowers are out. What do these two have in common? Well, maybe we might say it involves a hero and the entertainment's for kids in some way, right? We want kids to watch these things. There are R-rated superhero movies, however, right? So, okay, so it's not superpowers, it's not for kids. So what is it then? Maybe it just involves the protagonist being in tights in some way, but there are protagonists, obviously, that noticeably do not wear tights, right? They have the ripped purple jeans sometimes. But then if we're trying to, so if it's not superpowers, if it's not for kids, if it's not tights, then we might ask, well, then what's to stop us from saying that something like this franchise is a superhero movie too? Right? Where's the line if we're just talking about the text and like trying to define it that way? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, thanks. Quick primer on genre there. So the point of this quick exercise was to show you that there's going to be no like metaphysical definition of what a genre is. There's going to be no hard line that everybody agrees on. That's whether we're talking superheroes, that's whether we're talking horror films, that's whether we're talking soap operas, and that's also, I think, when we're considering sports. So instead, what people in my discipline do is they think about how these conventions are still set, but they don't, I'm sorry, every single instance of a text does not have to participate in these conventions. And furthermore, these expectations and conventions are set not just through the text, but in other locations as well. So for instance, what might make a superhero movie might just be who makes it, or how it's advertised. Again, even if it's not for kids, maybe the trailers make it look like a superhero movie. Sometimes it could be the text. It could be that certain tropes or themes are played up, even if there's no, like, even if like the superheroes might fight and that's kind of weird in a superhero movie, but like, hey, it's the tropes and themes. Maybe those tropes and themes are satirized in some way, but the tropes and themes are still in there. And finally, remember the fan component. Maybe it's just what fans decide superhero movies are in sometimes. Sometimes it's just enough for people to come together and say, this is a superhero movie, and that's enough for us to study it as a superhero movie. So therefore, the question again of whether this is a superhero movie, it's not really the point of what we do. Instead, the question is, how can franchises like this make use of, or maybe don't make use of, superhero conventions and associations in order to sell their product, in order to make their movie, and in order for fans to receive them? All right, how's all that for a little media study stuff? Okay, so let's get back to sports. I promise this is a sports talk, so let's get back to sports. I think, therefore, that sports are a transmedia genre that's set in these ways too, right? So when we think about sports as entertainment, that's what's happening as well. So I owe you then an account of what these associations and conventions are. What is the thing that makes all these diverse stuff hang together? And I think you can see that my answer to this question based on my very imaginative chapter titles. And if you don't see it immediately, I'll highlight it for you. So the question today, therefore, is to give you a sense of the answer to the question, what are sports media, by giving you a sense of how live and real competition can be expressed in a few different ways. We're going to take a wide scope and cover a lot of ground to give you an overall sense of how sports sort of connects to this idea that sports are live and real competition. But again, like I said at the end, I'll try to like spin out of my world and kind of like talk to you all about what maybe you all are interested in and how there might be some connections within this room about other kinds of things. So Let's start with the origins of the genre. Despite being sports so much than a competition, I think the beginning of the genre can be seen in how games developed. And so let's take an example that's close to home since we're here. In the early 20th century, collegiate football, it started out at, we know our history of college football, right? It started out as kind of like an intramural sport that was organized by students. It was for students and by students. Students made up the rules, students organized the competition, and as the game developed, it was kind of like they were the ones in charge of getting these things and organizing these games. And then schools would like play from each other. They would start like Harvard would play Yale and stuff like that. And that's where some like sporting rivalries kind of popped up around that stuff. What's interesting, though, is that as they started playing and as these games became more regular and as the game started to solidify into what might be considered football, the universities noted that people wanted to watch these games, students, fellow students, and alumni, and just people from the community. And they realized, the universities realized that they could make money off of these students playing the game. And so what happened was we started to get all these features that pop up around the sport. And one of the most simplest things to see is the creation of space. What happens to space when you want to get people to pay for the privilege to watch other people play sports? What you have to do, and this is a theme that we're going to see throughout the next part of the talk here, is what you have to do is use the competition of sports and live and real competition in order to create scarcity. Since sports happens in the moment and then it's gone, if you're only thinking live, don't worry about media, we'll get there. But if you want to watch a live sporting event, if you want to be entertained for it, you have to be there. And so what you have to do is you have to create blocks, essentially, to block non-paying customers from watching the game so that the paying and then therefore allow paying customers to see the game. So what you see here is that you see that fence that's around the stadium, and that's obviously meant to keep, first off, keep people away. If you didn't pay, you don't get to enter there. But also, by the way, it's far off. So if you happen to peek over the fence, you would see the game from a long distance away, and there might be trees or stands in the way of blocking this stuff. So the idea is protect the live and real competition in order to sell it. And this works because there's only one UW game that day, and either you were there to see it or not. And even though the sports are so much more than what happens within the stadium, the idea of putting up boundaries to protect the live and real competition is still in place today for in-person customers. We're sitting in that building now. But let's also bring media into this. First, it's worth noting that the relationship between media and those who organize sporting competitions, it isn't always as comfortable as we're used to seeing. This is one of my favorite things to teach my students about in my like sports media classes, is that we're used to being like, oh, well, Fox pays for the rights and then it's on television, and isn't that all very simple? And we're very accustomed to that. However, the relationship sometimes, because of the nature of the product, sometimes media companies and those who organize the competitions, they become at odds with each other, because the people who organize the events, they realize that our money is at the live competition. And if we broadcast that out, then all of a sudden people might not come to our games and therefore not pay the gate fees, not buy merch, and not eat and drink concessions and stuff like that, right? So they want to allow people through, they want to protect the media they want to protect the game from being mediated so that people go to the stadium and watch the event. And so, this is why blackouts exist. Are we often, maybe this is too, like, the local blackouts. So, if there's a UW game, those who organize the game might say, well, we won't broadcast it in Madison so that people will get out of their homes and into Camp Randall. But my favorite case of this is, here's historical anecdote time. The telegraph came into existence in the early days of when racing was at horse racing was at the height of its popularity. And those who organized horse races and who owned tracks, they were really worried that the telegraph would make it so that people would take the information, the race results and what was happening at the track, and telegraph it elsewhere, so that people could just get that information from their homes or in pool halls or something like that, and then therefore not go to the track and not pay the money to get in there, right? So they would lose money. So racetrack operators said, no telegraphing race results. You are banned from doing so. But there's good money in telegraphing that information. People would pay for it. And so what people did was they figured out ways to sneak information out of the racetracks through like bathroom windows. And my favorite anecdote involves tying race results to a balloon and sending the balloon over a fence where people would get it and then telegraph that information. But because, with every action, there's a reaction. So that resulted in things like bathroom windows being glued shut, which I'm sure is a hazard, a fire hazard of some sort, but also balloons being shot down, which I am sure is a hazard that nobody has a name for because it's so peculiar, right? But all this anecdote just shows that all these groups are like at odds with each other, right? The racetrack is doing whatever it can to try to protect the live and real competition so that people can pay for it. But I'll also note that even when the relationship between media and the people who are running the organization, even when they go hand in hand a little bit better, we still see the idea that live and real competition is a scarce entertainment resource that they will use to profit from. So for instance, if you want to watch this fight on pay-per-view, if you want to watch this fight, there's only two ways to do it. Either be in Manila and pay the money to go there, or pay-per-view. Note, it says at the bottom there, no home TV, no radio. You only have two options to get this scarce resource. This also happens with classic broadcast too. The only place to watch this is on ABC, and this is happening on digitally now too. On ESPN Plus, it's a subscription streaming service, and the only place to watch some of these leagues and events is through ESPN Plus. I think that's currently happening, or at least this morning, it happened with the Masters. I think the only way to watch early coverage of the Masters, I think, was through ESPN Plus. Somebody please, golf fan. I've seen some nods, golf fans. Okay. I think. So finally, if we're thinking about the relationship between sports and media, especially as an entertainment product, we should also note how they're packaged industrially. Remember, I told you this was coming, how they're packaged industrially. So first off, in an era of DVRs, sports are they're taken to be what is called zap-proof. Because sports are watched live, it's held. The commercials, you kind of like have to sit through them. It is held. But even if you fast forward, if you record it and fast forward it, the sporting events themselves the sporting events themselves also contain advertisements, and you therefore can't escape them. To watch a sporting event, especially of this sort, means that you will be advertised to. So obviously we don't need to talk about how uniforms or kits are now just billboards for airplane companies, tire companies. You can't watch broadcast of an event without being advertised by Adidas or Target or AT&T. And then if you all just want like a fun media thing that they're doing now, is that they can actually differ the ads depending on the audience. So in the corner there, you can see that if you're in the stadium, the ads, maybe I'll stand up. The ads that you're getting is a betting company if you're in the stadium. But if you're of a different audience and you're getting a different feed, you might get a car rental ad. Or if you're in you have a third audience, you might get a third feed and get a Coca-Cola ad. So they're getting really, really good at this. And I'll go you one further. Prediction time. I bet you that within 5 years or so, you're going to see a game that is going to be streamed on Amazon, and you're going to get ads that are personalized to you. So they're going to like use the data that they have on you and your search history and what you've bought, and you're going to get probably individualized ads through Amazon. Don't be too impressed because it hasn't happened yet, but I bet you it will happen. Okay, so let's keep going here. If we're thinking about how things are packaged industrially, we should mention big games like mega events like the Super Bowl. These are taken to be events that you have to see. Again, we're talking live and real competition and the value of that. You have to see, if you're a sports fan, you have to watch the Super Bowl as it's occurring. And of course, if we're thinking about commercializing that, the mega event that is the Super Bowl also has become one in which the ads themselves have become part of the thing that needs to be experienced live. We talk about the ads too. They become part of the sporting event. And then finally, of course, if we're broadening out, not just like beyond commercialization and just into pop culture as a whole, there might be other reasons to be interested in a sporting event like this. So we've gotten pretty far away from the competitive event at this point. It should feel that way, and that's okay. But we should note that how sports are sold and packaged foreground and highlight the liveness and realness of sports. But that's not to say that the competition itself also isn't constructed in certain ways that play into the genre. So now we're talking about the sports media itself, not how it's made, not how it's packaged, but the thing itself. So it's made, certain decisions are made to play up the idea that this is a entertainment option that's different from other entertainment options. So I know we've all seen sports broadcasts before, but let's just kind of watch one really fast and kind of think about the stuff that we've been talking about.
Everyone's got it down. Follow up. Greenberg's face says it all. Are you kidding me, Crystal Dunn? Well, Casey Stoney said set pieces might be the difference today, and they certainly seem to be. And that is, Dunn just pounces on this free off the top of the box. San Diego court clearance again and puts that one right into a danger zone, and Dunn wise to it. Takes that one on the half volley, absolutely smashes it into that top corner. What a strike, falling away from it, snappy finish. That is a thing of beauty to set this crowd on fire.
Okay, so obviously this revolved around a competition. It was the Portland Thorns versus the San Diego Wave. It was a real, unscripted competition, and it played out in front of those in the stadium and those watching the broadcast. And almost instantaneously, if you're watching it from the broadcast, you saw all the ads from the sponsors on the jersey and the stadium. It was a playoff game. It's kind of obscured over there by the Zoom nonsense, but it was a semifinal game. And so while not being a mega event, it was a much must watch for NWSL fans or Thorns fans or Wave fans. And then finally, to get to the point I was making a moment ago, think about all the ways that the competition was constructed through the broadcast. It was built through the narratives and analysis of the announcers. The replays shaped what mattered about the action on the pitch. The player reactions highlight that even they didn't know what was going to happen. And the shots to fans highlighted the excitement of watching it happen live. And for the broadcast audiences, those live fans serve as kind of witnesses to the live and real competition. We were here. This is happening. We didn't know what was going on. And then this awesome stuff happened, if you're a Thorns fan. So the broadcast structure and highlight the novelties of sports, but we can also see similar things in sports texts that aren't focused on competition. So I want to kind of go away from the broadcast now and think about other sports texts like commercials.
This might be the most emotionally charged match of a lot of the year.
The Black Hockey Club is all about building a community within the community.
Two people who had never met, but they have formed friends in that moment.
Okay. So why, according to this commercial, is there no place like sports? No, it's setting itself apart from other things. Why is there no place like sports? They're supposed to be enthralling entertainment options in which all of these diverse people come to watch this live and real competition. We all come together. We all have a space in this place to revel in the novel nature of sports, shown by fan celebrations in stadia, at bars, and at home. I could keep playing this game, and I was planning on to keep playing this game. I have a sports betting ad that I was going to show you, but I'm getting low on time here. But just to say, like, even gaming companies, it's not just ESPN, even gaming companies are making use of this stuff. Just as a quick aside, that my next book that I'm working on right now is on sports gaming and sports betting. And my last BIOS talk I gave, I think, was on sports betting. So if you ever want to talk that stuff with me, please feel free to. But we don't have time for that, so I'm going to skip that if PowerPoint will let me. Great. Okay. So remember, though, that all of these things that we just saw here are just case studies of something that I think happens in diverse sites. Live and real competition is used and constructed through other things that we see all around the sports media universe. Things like pregame shows, halftime shows, postgame shows. The same goes for athlete interviews around the game. Highlights distill it down to exciting and unpredictable moments. Sports talk shows debate what happened and what will happen and what should happen. Sports docs recreate live and real competition. Scripted recreation of sporting events do so as well. It is throughout online coverage, including even like sometimes memes make use of it. Like, I can't believe that happened. Isn't that silly? Sports video games try to capture it, and fans expect it and organize around it. So there's one other thing to note here is all these cases are pretty on the nose. And I just want to highlight that, remember that with generic conventions, they don't have to be present in each and every case. I think they are in all of these, but I want sports media to even account for cases that like kind of get themselves removed from the live and real competition. So, and to be able to account for cases like this too, by the way. This one's fast.
Did you possibly switch schedule? No, I mean, are you sure? Yeah. Good luck finding chair. Good luck. Okay. Okay.
As a quick ad for my sports media class, there's a whole day where we talk about the This Is Sports Center ads. So it's a very enjoyable thing to do with students is let's watch these things, and then they're legitimately funny and fun to work through. But what I want you all to see though is that there's almost no reference to sports in this. Like, I guess the reference to the throne is because he's King James, and that's our implicit reference to what he does on the court. He's wearing the uniform, but like, there's not a lot of sports in that sports ad. But we see that a lot throughout sports media. Sometimes sports media can be incredibly distanced from any representation of live and real competition. So I would like to argue, however, that even cases like these must be contextualized by the genre. Though these ads have no competition and some of them no sports, to understand Nike's Just Do It is to understand the messages it sends in other contexts about live and real competition. And even to be read as a sports brand at all, I think, Nike must connect itself to the generic conventions as a whole, even if it doesn't do so in each and every instance. So, given the reaches that sports can touch, it's important to keep the sporting context in mind when we study things like these, even if we aren't focusing on them as sports objects. We can talk about sports in fashion, music, scripted entertainment, and podcasts, and therefore also sports as part of popular culture and politics. So, in this way, sports media, in all of this diversity, differentiates itself as an entertainment genre associated with live and real competition. And again, this is supposed to distinguish itself from other options like scripted entertainment, like reality television, like game shows, and like documentary shows, even if those other things have ties to liveness or realness or competition. Remember, these are just constructions that are used by the industry to sell themselves, by the text to differentiate themselves, and by fans and their reactions to this stuff. So I had another commercial, but again, I'm a little bit behind. Just really quickly, I just want to highlight the commercial is supposed to show us that the connection between the connections and relationships between genres are porous. You can have like weird hybrid cases. Like, is anybody aware of the reality television show, The Challenge? Yeah, it's like supposed to be like a reality competition show, but it's also a reality show, but they really play up the sports of it. And the ad I was going to show you is where they claim to be America's fifth sport. This reality show claims itself. So like, I'm not really interested in whether it actually is a sport or not, but the idea is it definitely makes use of sports conventions in order to try to make that argument. Okay, so let's go ahead and then just move on to the kind of like the end game here. Oh, superhero reference. that pairs nicely with what I was just talking about. I hope you guys at least have a feel for what my research program looks like and what the book is kind of roughly about. I kind of just want to turn to the final point of the day and just kind of find a little overlap between thinking of sports in the way that I think about it and what might be happening in and around this building and maybe what athletics is up to more broadly. So as we all know, many collegiate sports are live and real mediated entertainment and therefore part of the genre of sports. A big portion of my book, like there's many pages that I write about college sports because they're a major part of the sports media universe. So I have to write on them in that way. But as we know from BIOS, thinking about collegiate sports as media or even thinking about it as entertainment is not the only lens that we should use to think about college sports, right? Just thinking about previous BIOS talks, right? College athletics through health and safety, through academics, through policy compliance, through leadership. There's just a ton of ways to think about college sports. And mine is just my particular one based on my discipline and my research interests, right? But that doesn't mean that there can't be overlap too. So just let's take like, I think I have what here? Yeah, I've got a little bit of time. 4 cases real fast. And I want to note something. My book is my book, and therefore I did a bunch of research. And if you guys want to talk to me about it, we can. What I'm about to say right now is me kind of just spitballing and just being like, wow, wouldn't it be fun to talk more about this kind of stuff? I have done almost no research on the things I'm about to say because I want to talk about like the UW specific component of some of these things. So for instance, we know that certain sports have become very popular entertainment media, right? Like entertainment products. There's been a lot of good research about how sports like these developed from pastimes for undergraduates to being million and billion dollar industries, right? There's good research on that topic. But as you read the topic, sometimes our school will be mentioned along the way. Like as you read research that's about these like national trends, we will be referenced. However, I am kind of curious about like going into more detail about like our specific school, like what were the changes made along the way to get us from the start of this story all the way to where we are now? What were the decisions that were made? Like questions like, who on campus shepherded these sports into being this way? When did it happen? What role did faculty and students and alumni play in this process? What were the conversations across the university that were had about it? Maybe even the city. What was the city talking about it? How was all that mediated and covered? But second, I'm also interested in the story of sports that were popular but aren't around anymore. So we used to have a baseball team, and I don't really know the story about why we don't have one anymore, except for when you kind of like leaf around a little bit, it says it was disbanded for financial reasons. But I would love to know the history more about why that happened. Was it tied to the idea that it was an entertainment sport in some way? Was it like not bringing in enough money or interest? What was going on there? What was the story? I'm interested in that because I'm a baseball fan, but I think the next historical case about a sport that was popular that isn't around anymore, I think is much more interesting because some of us might not even know that we had this sport back in the day, and that is collegiate boxing. A few people know that this existed. Yeah, I would love to know more about this. It was very popular, I guess. And so the question, I'd like to know why, I'd like to know how, I'd like to know how it was mediated. I would like to know why it went away. Again, not broadly, but at this university in particular, like what's the story here? I also bring this up too, by the way, because evidently my department and athletics have kind of joined. I guess athletics department has like found some old film of like black and white collegiate boxing, and we're like now we're saving those things and digitizing them and keeping them. And so, but they're there for analysis too. So we like, what did that look like? What do these films tell us about how that was? And then 2 contemporary cases, and then I'll shut up. The increased interest in coverage of women's sports, I think, is incredibly interesting in this case. What does it mean for the players and coaches? Has it changed or altered the games or competitions in some way? Has the sports, how has the sports are covered changed or shifted? Has fandom changed in some way with all of this increased interest? And we could talk a little bit more about the gendered component of this too, because there's a lot of research that's from the 70s, 80s, 90s, early aughts that shows that oftentimes when women's sports and women athletics is discussed in mainstream and popularized media, it's often demeaned or ignored. And so I kind of like to know, like, are those trends changing with all this increased coverage? There's just a ton of questions here. And then finally, NIL, of course, now all of a sudden that has shifted what sports entertainment can be and what mediated advertisements can look like. I'm also incredibly interested, not just in like some of the sports that seem to be in the limelight more, but what about sports that aren't as much? What's that doing to the sports? What's that doing for the athletes? So all of this is just my way of saying that from my perspective as a media and cultural studies scholar, I'm always interested in what's happening in this building. And that's why I love BIOS and love coming to BIOS. I never know what I'm going to hear about and the kind of conversations that are being had in here. So like, I'm always interested in this stuff. And so I would kind of just like maybe to hear what you all think about this kind of stuff, or, any advice or ideas that you all have, I would also appreciate, but I'll also take questions if you have it as well. So thanks again to Maria and Pete for allowing me to do this. And thank you. That's it.
You have any questions?
A real quick one, from what I had read and looked up, it was the death of a UW boxer that kind of caused a move against college boxing. Had you seen that before?
No, I'm telling you, I was speaking literally from the cuff. I like, it was just like, no, I had not, this is all things.
Madison specifically has tied to that, I'm fairly certain. Yeah, to talk more with you about that, or as much as I read.
Yeah, do you know, like, do you remember dates or any, like, I mean, I could,
60 or 61.
yeah, wow. Yeah, that would
Yeah.
be a reason to shut down a sport, probably.
And there's a case of policy change in like state combat sports and what's been allowed to by the death of a combatant more recently as well. So it's something I looked into in a couple different angles, but
That's awesome. Well, what's your connection to sport? What do you do?
I do combat sports.
Okay.
Muay Thai player.
Oh, so that's so you weren't looking it up professionally, you were looking it up just because of your own personal interest. Okay. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I would love to hear more about that. That's really interesting. Yeah. There's a one of my colleague has recently written a book that you know, of course it's in our discipline, so you may or may not be interested, but she's writing about the UFC and its rise and how they kind of like brand themselves. And it's an incredible book. So her name's Jennifer McLaren, and I can send you the information if you want, if you're interested in combat sports. It's a great book. Thank you.
Jason, I have a question in terms of going to what you were saying earlier regarding a lot of the different mediums that sports comes out. Like we like to sometimes think of like watching it via the television, but now we have all these options and we have, you know, replay, we have Instagram, we have TikTok, we have all these different social media forms. How has that impacted the commercialization of sport and how people view it?
Oh, I mean, I think in one way incredibly, and in some ways, I think it's like the same old, right? So like, I mean, let's take TikTok, right? Because it is an incredibly different social media. It is an incredibly different platform, and it's happening on a medium, social media kind of broadly, that, you know, didn't exist very long ago, right? So like all these new things are kind of like popping up through TikTok, given what it is. And so like, yeah, there's all sorts of like different like aesthetics that occur through TikTok. There's different norms in TikTok culture that might be different than sports cultures, or even say other forms of social media like Instagram or Facebook or whatever, right? And so there's all these different like norms that come across, like the different type of medium, social media, and the different type of like platform within social media, like TikTok versus on Facebook. So there's all this difference, and that's important to note. However, I've also found though, when you like look around at what's kind of happening sometimes on these things, it's actually sometimes pretty unified. It turns out that like TikTok is actually a pretty good platform to discuss sports. Why? Because we have this idea of like the sports highlight. This one explosive event that happens and you might want to rewatch over and over again. That doesn't take very long to play out, and you just want to watch it. A guy robs somebody of a home run. Now I'm thinking combat sports. Somebody knocks somebody else out, right? That's something that you might want to see happen over and over again. So on the one way, TikTok enabled that to happen, but on the other hand, the sports highlight is about as old as news coverage, like televisual news coverage. Not even back in the day when people would go to movies, like movie theaters to watch sports, like that was often through highlights too, right? So like on the one hand, when we see all this new stuff, there's new cultures and new technologies, and that's important to acknowledge. But sometimes it's still sometimes the same old, and it's largely, I think, because of like this kind of stuff that we were talking about today. That's a really good question.
Is your book a historical approach to explaining this idea of live and real competition?
Yeah.
Is it more of an approach to honoring the influences? I ask that question because top of mind are two things. Like it's easy to make a connection between the debate show format and like evangelical radio of the 1940s and 50s.
Yeah.
Or the presentation of NBC and their pioneering impact on basketball.
Yes.
To connect that to pro wrestling.
Yeah.
And NBC's coverage of WrestleMania. Right, so it's easy to make those connections on how live and real entertainment as far as sports have those sort of influences.
Yes, so I will say that the book is kind of just a small book, right? It's a quick overview, and because it's basically that argument, just kind of like going through a few case studies, right? Is how it goes. So I don't have the opportunity to talk about like, all sorts of all these like independent cases oftentimes. So I had to kind of like choose my cases along the way. But your question is getting at something that I kind of buried, that I play up for when I talk to people who like work in my discipline, but you're getting at it. So let's talk about it for a quick moment. Part of the reason why I wrote this book was because we need an account of what sports media is, but also the people who research sports media need an account. And so we have this like great work, all these great works on all this really diverse stuff, including some of the stuff that you're talking about, by the way. I know a bunch of great people working on wrestling stuff in particular, and like telling the historical story and talking about how that manifests now. And the part of the goal of the book was to say, well, some of the work that was already being done, I even want to unify like the research. So like, even though I can't work through each and every case like that, what I can do is give a theoretical underpinning for why that is sports media and why your mind would go to those cases. Yeah. I love the wrestling case, and in a previous version of this talk, just as a quick aside, instead of the challenge video, I did professional wrestling.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was your other case, by the way? The debate talk show one?
So you could easily make a connection between debate talk shows, right? First Take,
Yeah.
to evangelical radio, right? It's
Huh.
the very same similar format, 1940s, 50s. There's an evangelical religious idea that we are using boisterous, loud voices that are making false equivalencies for the notion of the impact to resonate. That's debate shows are really just evangelical radio.
Super interesting.
Right, like you can listen to those characters and you know that they don't believe it.
Yeah.
But the sake is, I have to convince you that I believe it.
Yeah. Well, that's like, I would have loved to talk to you before I finished before this book went to print, because that's the exact kind of thing that I was talking about kind of towards the beginning part, which is that genres borrow from each other. I said that those boundaries are porous. And so like sports can take from any place, and other places can take from sports too. And so we should expect that kind of generic slide. That's fantastic.
I should have said this at the beginning, and I apologize I didn't, but yeah, so thank you so much, Dr. Lopez. So we at BIOS here, our goal is to bring together research in sports and athletics in meaningful and purposeful ways, and to look at sports through a couple different disciplines. And we've been fortunate to learn from Jason along the way, and he's been a great partner for us. So thank you for your time, and thanks for coming. Really appreciate it. Hope you all have a good rest of your Friday.